Hello everyone, and thanks for attending our session today. This is part of a series of webinars that we're going to produce for you, all around how employment law and HR can save your business. Today, in particular, we're looking at how to foster a positive culture in the workplace. And so we hope that you find this information really helpful and informative. So today, I'm joined by Roy Magara from Magara Law, and I'm Zoe Lidster from Harwood HR Solutions. So please do feel free to contact us at any point after today if you've got any further questions or anything indeed that we can support you with. So I'll hand over to Roy now to give you some interesting facts.
Thank you very much, Zoe. So as everyone's going to be seeing on the screen at the moment, there are going to be a series of speech bubbles that have got a series of facts. And these statistics have been taken, and what they should hopefully bring into our minds is the question, why should culture be a priority for businesses? Businesses might often see this as the fluffy stuff or something that businesses don't take seriously. One thing that needs to be thought about is that if you're going to be fostering a positive culture within your workplace, these statistics are going to help you frame your mind in doing so. Some interesting facts are that 1 in 3 employees believe that their employer doesn't take their company culture seriously. And as you can see on the screen, for example, only 84% of employees recommend their company as a place to work. Now, if your employees are supposed to be your ambassadors, your shout outs for your business, then that statistic is quite frighteningly low. And that should then hopefully frame our minds into thinking that company culture actually ought to be an integral part of your business, because evidently it affects almost every aspect of your company, whether it's recruitment from top talent, as we're going to be looking at, to employee satisfaction, and indeed, perhaps from the litigious side, reduction rather of employment tribunal claims. These are the kind of things that we are going to help you think about, and that we can all have a good discussion about when it comes to framing positive company culture.
Thanks, Roy. So now we're going to talk to you about our 5 secret steps to fostering a positive culture in your workplace. Maybe not so secret, but certainly very important. So the first one we're going to look at today is leadership. The way that leaders communicate and interact with their employees really is probably the most important thing here. We need to ensure that everyone in the workforce is engaged, that they understand where the business is going. What's the vision for the business? What are the company goals? How do they fit into those? They need to feel it needs to be inclusive, because they need to understand why what they're doing on a daily basis is really important to the business and its success. So the vision of the company, is it shared with everybody? Do they understand the goals that they're working towards? Do they understand the impact on not reaching those goals? There needs to be the trust there. So we have to trust our employees. We have to allow them to carry out their job on a daily basis without micromanaging them. They need to feel that they get recognition when we've done something good, that we celebrate success as a team. And the way that the leaders interact with the employees really does have a knock-on effect to their engagement and whether they're truly sort of committed to the organisation, and then in turn to the kind of culture you have. Because if it's a very inclusive culture where everybody feels that they're part of the team, and that the leaders are working with the employees, then it really does shape the way that the culture develops within that organisation.
Sure, I think Zoe, you mentioned a really good point there about communication. What are your thoughts, may I ask, on leaders or businesses understanding people's different communication styles?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's important to understand that, right? Because the business that you're in, is not the same for everyone. So, at the moment, for example, lots of people are working from home. That's very different to in terms of communication now, because we're not just in an office where you can just walk over and have a chat with somebody. It's very different. We have to make time to actually hold regular catch-ups with employees. So are we doing Zoom calls? Are we just picking up the phone and having a chat? Is it just a quick message to check in? The way that the leaders communicate down to the managers below them as well. So do they encourage the managers to share the information with the rest of their teams? How does that go down then through the organisation? Because often, sometimes that's the sticking point. So leaders will communicate with their direct managers, but then they don't know what happens after that. Does that information go anywhere else? Do some managers pass the information to their teams, so half of the company know what's going on, but the other half don't because their managers didn't think to pass that information on? And going back to the way we communicate, so as I said, with people working from home, that's different, but in general anyway, do we communicate always via email? Is it an email culture within the organisation? Nobody ever speaks to each other face to face. Therefore, again, employees don't feel as engaged because they don't really they read an email, it doesn't really necessarily make sense perhaps to them, because of the where they are in the organisation. They don't understand where perhaps the overall bigger picture of where this email's coming from. So actually, do we just do some stand-up meetings with everybody, getting people together, having a good chat to them? Do the leaders of the business sometimes talk to the whole organisation, or is it always just their line manager passing on the information?
Sure, thank you. And I think some of the points you mentioned quite nicely lead into this next slide that we're going to be looking at in terms of management. And from a business point of view, or as managers, you really need to be thinking about how your employees feel, because again, they are the ones who are going to be helping drive forward your plans, your ideas, and exactly what the vision of the company is. If you just have in your mindset that you as a business leader are influential, then that ought to be flowing through the systems, procedures, structures, goals, and objectives, which your employees need to really understand. Zoe mentioned a really good point about communication, and communication actually feeds into a lot of these things. For example, empowerment of your employees. Giving positive praise or complimenting your staff is something that can quite easily just be put to the wayside. And particularly where some members of staff might feel that their work is monotonous, or they don't feel like they're getting much praise, so they're feeling underappreciated, they can quite easily get frustrated with the projects that they're working on, or might just end up coasting through their work without even realizing. And if you don't think that's an issue, well, you have to think about the effect that might have on the profitability of your business, because the fact that your employees aren't working as hard as they could, or as smartly as they could, because a lot of them are feeling defeated or unmotivated. So make sure your goals and objectives, one of them ought to be empowering your employees, but equally so in terms of how you communicate these things to your employees. If your employees are seeing various other members of staff getting the praise or understanding their goals and objectives, then they are going to feel lost. They're going to feel cast away. So it's important that you have the relevant procedures and policies rather in place that are fed through the company, so that everyone understands exactly what their role is, where they're at, and how they can achieve and progress, because most people do not want to just stay stuck where they are. Most people want to understand where they're going. And if there can be effective management and systems in place that can bring forth some kind of transparency, that will allow your staff to be able to see a clear path in terms of where they're going. Decision making too. Is your company one where the culture feels like there's an air of micromanagement? While many people or some people may need some kind of training or some kind of assistance or handholding in particular areas, most people want to feel like they have some element of autonomy to just get on with what they're doing and be able to present their work to their manager, etc. If you have a culture, and unfortunately it happens in a number of places, but if you have a culture where there is micromanagement, you're going to find that that is going to have a negative effect. So managers, empower employees by giving them space to do what you hired them to do, which is what they're good at.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, we've talked about this before, I know, but, involving the employees in decision making, I think that's really important because, and it kind of feeds into those systems and procedures as well. If you're bringing a new system in place or you're making changes to a system that you use or a procedure, have you asked the end user how that might affect them, or what they think might be a good improvement? Because they're the people sometimes that are overlooked again because they're, it's important to, is there just a button that if we had this on your system, it would make your life so much easier and it would mean that this task could be carried out, either more efficiently or more effectively? Speak to those people because they're the people that are doing this day to day, and by doing that they will feel, as you said, they'll feel empowered, they'll actually just feel that you've recognized the job that they do.
Mm.
Oh, I'm valued, and that my thoughts are valued, my opinions are valued. A nice scheme that I've used before, which works well, is a suggestion scheme. So it's a sort of almost a staff benefit, really. But it's an ideas scheme where employees can put their ideas forward in just that, a suggestion box, whether that's a physical box or it's an inbox somewhere. But they can send that through, and for suggestions that get implemented within the organisation that really make a difference, then there's some kind of reward, a financial reward maybe, or some kind of treat, if you like, but that there's a recognition for that idea that they've put forward. So
Yeah, good shout.
So we've touched on policies and procedures just now, but having the right ones in place is definitely something that I think, again, is overlooked. Sometimes you will see employee handbooks that are this big with hundreds of policies in that nobody ever really reads or understands. And, actually the employer is then in danger of potentially breaching their own policy because actually you've got too many to adhere to anyway. But having a really good set of policies and procedures that are relevant, that employees can access whenever needed, that they can go to for when they have a question. These things, maternity, paternity, pop up. They know where to find the policy. It's very clear to understand, easy to read. It's almost your procedure as well as your policy, so that everyone's treated fair and consistently. And having a nice handbook with those general rules in the business as well, but again, so that there's clarity, people understand, everybody's working towards the same thing. What's the dress code, what's your code of conduct, what are the things that are important in the business? Again, it's nice to include things like your vision, your mission, your values, so that people really understand what the company culture is all about and what you're trying to achieve as an organisation. So I think having a nice set of policies in place with your handbook that kind of overarches that is a really good way forward. But again, keep those policies relevant. Don't have a policy for having a policy's sake. And maybe, as you work towards developing a handbook, again, include some employees in that process. What would they like to see? What would be really helpful? I think it would be really interesting, to find out what employees do think of their handbooks that exist currently, because I'm sure that there would be lots of time and energy spent on putting these things together. I'm sure that there would be some really good suggestions that come out of that exercise.
Agreed. Really good points there.
I mean, Roy, in your line of work, how many times do you kind of see that lack of policy or or breach of policy comes up, and then how actually it can really complicate it for the employer?
Let's see. I probably say 60% of the time. So it's unbelievably high, and it is so avoidable. Consequently, it's either that the business doesn't have policies when they ought to, or more worth the shame is when they do have the policies and then they just simply don't follow them. And employment tribunals are very hot on that. And in many instances, if there is an employee who brings an Employment Tribunal claim for unfair dismissal, say, and argues that development procedures weren't followed or simply don't exist, then one can often find, as a business, you're on the back foot of an automatic unfair dismissal in that instance. So these are really important things that we're discussing here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Equally as important are the people that you hire. We may often hear the sort of phrase that people don't leave the business itself or the job itself per se, they leave bad management or they leave bad culture. And probably most, if not all of us, know someone or ourselves have been in situations where we've been under bad management, or we know or have heard of a bad line manager. And the reality is, no matter how good the job is, or no matter how well someone might enjoy their particular employment, if you have a toxic individual in your business, then that bad apple can really rot the rest there, really. And so it's really important when it comes to hiring that you take a real forensic view on the sorts of people that are coming through your doors, because you want to make sure that the people who do form part of your company are congruent with your company's values, your company's beliefs, and where the company's going. You also want to make sure that the people who you're hiring have got the right skill set for what you want. No one wants to be in a team with someone who isn't pulling their weight, or no one wants to be in the midst of someone who says they can do something but quite evidently they can't. And all these sorts of things really drive home, or ought to drive home rather, to employers that these things genuinely do matter. I actually was speaking to a client yesterday, in fact, who mentioned that her line manager, who came in 2 years ago, she'd been with this company for 25 years, and she was mentioning that the line manager who came in eventually hired a really good friend of his and someone else, and now it just feels like those three are kind of ruling the roost in a very much kind of clique fashion, and all the other 40 odd employees just feel somewhat left aside because they don't feel right now, because that these three people have been hired, they are just doing things on their own accord and are ignoring everything else. So managers really need to be quite clear in terms of the kind of structure of people that they're hiring. And similarly, so no employee wants to feel that there's one person who's taking all the glory, or one person who is looking to get all the praise for themselves. Collaborative working is just as important as allowing people the space to work autonomously as well, and bring together fresh ideas, and bring together a sense that there could be interaction at all levels, right from the highest point of management to other people on the ground. And equally so, speaking of the interaction, that matters. I have known of a number of examples where clients have said to me, we're in the middle of this meeting and all of a sudden the manager is fine with A, B, and C, but then it came to me and the tone changed, the levels of patience changed, so much changed, and I just don't get it. And that, of course, will affect the mood and the morale of the rest of the team as well. So really think about these things. When it comes down to okay, now what do I do about this toxic employee? Zoe, your company, Harwood HR Solutions, put out a really helpful framework in terms of a structured leaflet about toxic employees, and actually about how, for businesses, it isn't necessarily the end of the world. There are ways of dealing with toxic employees in the right way. There's even a wrong way of dealing with toxic employees. But perhaps you're welcome to maybe talk a little bit about what you advise businesses in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best piece of advice as well is that we have to deal with it, right? And actually, the problem with sometimes having these types of employees in an environment, particularly in a small organisation where, you know, everybody knows each other, the business owner, MD, whatever, is very much involved in day to day and knows all of the employees well. It can be quite difficult because there's almost a sense of fear having to deal with that person because of their nature. Okay, so they know that something's got to be done about it, but they don't really know how to go about doing that, and and they worry about the consequences of doing so. Everyone's worried about whether you know, is the employee going to try and sue me? Are they going to be off to an employment tribunal? And reality is that with the right support and guidance, if needed, you can work through a process relatively easy and quickly. But you know, addressing it is important. So the longer it goes on for, the harder it's going to get. um,
Yeah.
Deal with it in the right way, get some good advice and support to do so. But just, you know, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be working through your disciplinary procedure. um, and do so in those steps, and feel confident in what you're saying and doing, because at the end of the day, if you're going through a process in the right way with the right intention for the right reasons, then you can't go too far wrong. So, but get that advice and support. And if you don't think it's something you can do yourself, get someone to do it for you, but deal with the situation, right? Don't be frightened to do that. Don't worry about what might happen. Deal with it, because actually leaving that employee in your business is potentially more damaging, than anything else that's going to happen down the line. So, yeah, just do it is probably a good phrase.
Let's do it. I second the motion.
Yeah, absolutely. So on to our last step, or secret, as we like to call them, is the work environment. So we're not just talking about a nice place to work here, and you know, we've got you know, a lovely canteen and a nice coffee machine. Those things are important, but you know, there's so much more that we need to think about in terms of developing culture. Again, you know, while hygiene factors are important, so job security and pay and policies and all that kind of thing is in the physical environment is important. Some of the other pieces we've got up on screen right now are actually the things that often go overlooked, and are actually key to developing this positive culture. Firstly, and probably my most favourite, actually, is everyone's human. Um, and we need to remember that, and just be human. So you treat people how you want to be treated. um, Goes a long way. Understand that person's individual circumstance, are there outside influences? um, People make mistakes, we all do, right? So let's understand how that mistake happened, you know, why it occurred. Was there something outside influencing that individual at the time? You know, it's out of character for them, they don't usually make mistakes. Well, let's take time to talk to them and find out what happened, how, you know, how did this occur. You know, you might find something's going on at home, someone might not be very well, there might be, you know, money worries, there could be just stress, they're moving home, and you know, you never know what's going on in someone's personal life unless you talk to them. So have a chat, understand,
Mm.
be there, be supportive. um, it goes a long way, because as you get better at communicating with employees, they will open up to you. You'll be able to um, give something back by the understanding and being, you know, allowing room for error where, if that's happened, or you know, helping to create respect, because it goes a long way. If your manager's prepared to sit down and listen to you and be supportive and helpful, you're going to want to give something back to them as well. It shows, you know, it opens up those lines of communication. um, Trust is really important, we've talked about it already, but don't micromanage the team. Allow people autonomy to do their job and do it well. um, Recognize an achievement, we've mentioned it before, but it's really important, so let's celebrate success. You know, everyone's different with that as well, and that's worth bearing in mind. Some people will absolutely hate you standing up in front of the team and saying, well done Roy, great job today. Some people will just curl up and die because they don't like that. And get to know your team, understand them. If you have that person in your team, drop them an email, something a little bit more private. But there's others in the team that will thrive upon having everybody saying, great job, well done. You know, it really motivates them, drives them. But this is why it's important to get to know your team. Go back to be human. Yeah. Get to know the individuals that you've got working for you. what makes them tick, what doesn't, and just, I guess, respect breeds respect, right? So I think if we all operate that way, it goes a long way to then creating a team that feels engaged, empowered, and automatically will mean everyone works way more efficiently, effectively. You're always going to get something extra back from them.
I'm with you on that. Really, really good points. I actually really like the point you mentioned about praise and about how different people receive praise differently, as opposed to just a blanket rule. That's something quite new. Thank you. That's a great point.
Okay.
So let's have a look at some case law examples in terms of what can go wrong when company culture goes wrong. So the first case is one of Minto, who was a claimant. So Minto was a female employee who she alleged that she was subjected to daily remarks of abusive behavior in what the other side would have just called banter, really. But as far as Minto was concerned, these remarks were very much of a sexual nature. They revolved around the carry-on films. And as far as the manager was concerned, the evidence was, well, banter is part of our culture here. Banter is part of our everyday fact of life. And that also included strong language. But as far as the claimant was concerned, that amounted to sex discrimination and harassment. And somewhat unsurprisingly, the employment tribunal agreed in that regard. Banter, yes, indeed, can form part of company culture. I'm not suggesting for one moment that banter needs to be removed from every company. I'm sincerely not saying that. But to use the tribunal's thought process on banter, banter is very much a loose expression. And sometimes banter can be used for what can cover abusive behavior or as some kind of alternative to accept this is just how we do. So companies need to be really sensitive. This kind of goes back to your recruitment point or understanding who your people are within your company. Companies just need to be quite careful, and this can come into the framework of your policies and procedures and how they run, and ensure that banter, that really thin line, doesn't get crossed. And McLean is an example, not of banter, but about, for example, how we're talking about management styles and how we're talking about communication styles as well. In McLean, this is the case where the tribunal had held that the claimant, who was a manager at the logistics company Menzies Distribution, was constructively unfairly dismissed. So that's where McLean felt he had no choice but to resign based on, in this case, the manager's behaviour. So we see here there was a task which McLean was asked to do, and for whatever reason that didn't go to plan. And the firm's CFO had sent an email, including McLean, to 15 other members of staff, just berating him, really, and saying that a lot of the work that McLean had done was, quote, an omnishambles, which is quite a prolific word to use, really, to quite clearly just publicly embarrass the claimant in this regard. Unsurprisingly, as far as McLean was concerned, this showed not only quite a bullying nature, but also the fact that there was a clear breakdown in trust, in confidence, in faith in the grievance process, which wasn't handled properly either, unsurprisingly, because the CFO himself was part of the grievance process. So again, I would argue that actually the omnishambles was on the company's behalf, as opposed to McLean's. But in this particular case, McLean's was ordered to pay. I beg your pardon. The employment tribunal had awarded McLean £14,000 with respect to his claims. So no small sum here when it comes to the consequences of a bad culture in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example of bad management, right? And I think that unfortunately something that happens more than you probably would expect, because someone hasn't thought about the consequence of their action or taken time to think before sending that email. And again, about where managers haven't got good lines of communication, that they haven't thought about how they treat people, and it takes me back to being my point of human. I wonder if that manager would have liked to have been on the receiving end of an email like that himself. I think sometimes, and we all understand stuff happens in heat of the moment, whatever it might be, but sometimes so many issues could be avoided by managers, employers taking a step back before acting upon something and thinking
Yeah,
about the consequences that it may have. But again, it comes back to culture, because if you have an open culture where it's positive, people feel they can talk to each other, you can address issues, you can have open and honest conversations with individuals. Um, Again, it stops this type of thing happening later down the line. And I think that that's a really good one to use, as is the banter one. Again, endless times I can think of where things have got been kind of out of control because someone slightly stepped over the line, or
mm,
because companies have grown, so there's a tight team of the original kind of crew that were there, and then as the company's grown and lots of other people have come in, maybe that sort of tight knit um, sort of banter that used to go on,
yeah,
isn't now appropriate, because actually other people, well, what's funny to that group isn't funny to somebody else. So
mm,
yeah, I think they're both really good examples actually of where issues just can be avoided by by just setting out expectations and creating the right culture.
yeah. I'm with you. You had a super good point there. And I think if companies just get into the mindset that your employees are your ambassadors, and employees leave for different reasons, positive as well as negative, but bad news often travels faster than good news to begin with. And there are so many websites out there like Glassdoor, for example, where an employee can just anonymously put all the dirty laundry out about the company. Never mind the negative PR that can come when someone Googles, oh, shall I join this company, Menzies Distribution, and then they see employment tribunal claim. I mean, that ought to be one of the last things that a company wants in terms of negative PR. You want your outgoing employees, for whatever reason they leave, to say, actually, you know what, I really enjoyed working there, and I'm going to put my LinkedIn, really enjoyed my tenure here. Thank you so much. Great place to work. I recommend it. That's what you want, because that reinforces a positive culture. And then you can recruit more people who will help build that vision and that dream.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good note to end it on, Roy. So thanks to everybody again for listening. Our details are on screen. Please do give us a call if there's anything at all that we can help with. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you.